Welcome and good morning to our session at this year's CEMIC conference. My name is Sven Schade. I'm working for the European Commission's Joint Research Center, where I'm leading our research on digital governance, and I will be your moderator between now and lunchtime. So the theme of this year's conference is human-centric data spaces powered by interoperability. And now in the next 45 minutes, we will more explore the particular topic of data governance in the light of user centricity. We have three distinguished speakers, and you will hear their intervention in a few minutes. And we will also have time for discussion with all of you. Before we are diving into the details, please let me remind you that you can ask your questions at any time using Slido. Please put your questions in our track, which is track number 2. It should appear as a little green button or a green dot in your window. So please, I myself and my colleagues will keep a close eye on your questions and bring them up at the right moment. Feel free to ask them at any time via Slido. Also, if you're eager to use social media, please also feel free to tweet or use other means using the hashtag CEMIC 2021. So with this, I think we are ready to go. It's my great pleasure to already introduce our first speaker, which is Viivi Lähteenoja from Finland, and she is a senior advisor for MyData Global. Viivi will basically introduce the MyData concepts and the ecosystem architecture for human-centric data use. And from there, we will then hear the role of the MyData operator as a particular player in interoperable and personal data ecosystems, and eventually also hear a few examples from the current implementation in Helsinki. So I stop here. The floor is yours, Viivi. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sven. If I can get my slides up, thank you for the introduction. So my name is Viivi Lähteenoja, and as Sven mentioned, I'm a senior advisor for an organization called MyData Global. And MyData Global is an international non-profit organization whose purpose is to empower individuals by improving their right to self-determination regarding their personal data. Now, I have to apologize for my voice today. I'm a little bit under the weather, but I am super happy to be here to talk to you about MyData and novel personal data governance initiatives in Finland. So let's have a look at the next slide, I think. Yes, and next one still. Great. So in summary, what I'll talk about is first an introduction to the concept of MyData. I'll then go into a little more detail about what it means in the context of data spaces in particular. I'll then give an example from Finland of how it can work. And finally, I will wrap up with some thoughts about what's needed next. So on the next slide, we have MyData. All of us here, we're well aware of how much data is collected about each of us every minute of our lives through our interactions with the digital. We're also all here aware of just how powerful that data is. We're aware of the things it can make happen in the world, very real things and also very bad things. And the current paradigm of personal data revolves around organizations, mainly companies, who collect and control personal data about us. And because personal data about us is considered to belong to these organizations, they're also able to wield that power of that data for their own ends. So MyData is an alternative vision for how things should be and how they can be. It's an ethically sustainable model for data governance. MyData recognizes the fundamental imbalance in power today between huge companies and individual people, as well as groups and communities, or even entire societies. So to correct for this imbalance, MyData takes a human-centric approach to personal data. This means that instead of thinking about data about ourselves as belonging to companies, we start to think about that data as belonging to us, the human beings about whom it exists. So instead of thinking about the data about me as Facebook data or Google data, I start thinking about it as Viivi data. And this Viivi data is something that I should have agency over, that I should be able to decide who uses it and for what purposes. So that's the very basic idea of MyData. I, as a human being, should be able to set the agenda for how data about me is used. And it's a fundamental paradigm shift in order to build a more fair, a sustainable, and prosperous digital society for all, and one in which the sharing of personal data is based on trust and a balanced and fair relationship between individuals and organizations. So the basic idea was described in the MyData Declaration from 2017, and you can find it at mydata.org/declaration. And I highly recommend it. It's a very short document as well. On to the next slide, please. I'll speak a little more about what MyData means specifically for data sharing ecosystems, such as data spaces. So one of the key insights of the MyData Declaration is that in order for people to have real agency over the data about themselves, they need help. They need a trusted intermediary to manage the flows of data involved in an ecosystem of various data sources and data using services. And this is where the MyData operator concept comes in. The MyData operator was described already in a MyData white paper in 2014. And those of you familiar with the recently finalized Data Governance Act will notice a striking resemblance between what the DGA calls data intermediation service providers and MyData operators. So the basic idea is that we need a network of operators that provide intermediation services for data, much like banks provide intermediation services for money, or telco operators provide intermediation services for phone calls and text messages. So a network of MyData operators allows me to choose an operator I trust while also controlling, sharing, and reusing data from data sources or with data using services that may use other operators. Now, a healthy and competitive market for these operators requires regulation. And we at MyData Global have been actively working with the Commission and the Parliament in the build-up to the finalization of the DGA. And the market for operators is indeed emerging. And just last month, we awarded the 2021 MyData Operator Awards to additional organizations, making it a total of 30 companies and organizations who have received this award to date. Now, on the next slide, I want to share a concrete example from actually building the technical capabilities to function as a MyData operator from the city of Helsinki. The city of Helsinki is a member of MyData Global and committed to putting the principles of the MyData Declaration into practice. They have recently concluded a project whose outcome has been to implement a mechanism for managing permissions of residents for the city to access and use certain data about them in order to streamline service processes. A concrete use case was found in daycare services. The city of Helsinki provides daycare services for its residents for a fee. However, if a family's income is in a specific bracket, they are eligible for subsidized daycare for their children. So the usual process for being approved for subsidized daycare involves awareness of the possibility of the subsidy in the first place, then an application to the city, as well as requesting and forwarding an income statement from the tax authority to the city. So with the permission management and technical capabilities built by the city can automatically ask families with children in daycare if the city can check the family income directly from the tax authority and approve subsidies without the lengthy and cumbersome application and documentation process by the family. So this is an example where the family can manage access to data about themselves and to agree to its use to make their lives easier. Now, finally, on the next slides are the 6 MyData principles as described in the MyData Declaration. And I want to point to something that I'm sure we've all been thinking about this whole time, that none of what I've been describing is possible without interoperability. So let me conclude by just congratulating each and every one of you here for your interest in and work towards better interoperability. By making advances in interoperability, we enable the emergence of truly open and ethically governed ecosystems of data. These ecosystems are essential for healthy and competitive markets for businesses, whether they are operators, data sources, or data using services. So we're all in this together, and I look forward to collaborating to create truly human-centric data spaces powered by interoperability. Thank you.
Excellent, Viivi. Thank you very, very much indeed for sharing your insights, but also making the connection actually to European policy on the Data Governance Act, and also for providing a very concrete example to local administration in Helsinki. I think with this, we really saw a lot of really inspiring insights we can learn from. And of course, also holding the flag for interoperability here, much appreciated. For our work also in the future. With this, I will have a look into Slido right now if we have particular questions to you already coming in. From experience, there is sometimes a little bit of a delay, people writing up questions when there are relatively short presentations, but let's already have a first look where we are going. To remind everybody, it's the green room. And there is one more addressing more addressing your the interplay between more ethical and sustainability models of data governance, and actually mentioning this, connecting it to interoperability as one of the main principles you just mentioned. So basically the question is, could you basically connect the dots a little bit more, how ethics and interoperability relate to each other?
Absolutely, that's a really good question. So I think the way ethics and interoperability are connected to each other is through something that's been called the ethical imperative of significant choice, which basically states that it is ethically imperative of us as societies to grant individuals as well as groups and communities significant choice over a number of things. And in this context, obviously, we're talking about personal data. So interoperability is something that enables these open ecosystems and fair competition, where I'm able to choose with whom I trust my personal data. The case is like, this is not what it's like right now. There are sort of both very real lock-in effects as well as kind of de facto lock-in effects, whereby because of the way the ecosystem currently works, I have to be on a social network, for example, in order to be able to conduct my business, or I have to use the services of a particular company because without it, my life would just be incredibly difficult. So interoperability is something that allows for this significant and meaningful choice to emerge, which is an ethical imperative for individuals to be able to exercise their agency.
Thanks a lot. So it really speaks for actually a digital single market involving all these operators you can choose from and make your deliberate choice. Thank you very much again, Viivi. We will get back to questions to everyone towards the end of the session, but with this, we already move to our second speaker of today, which is Marlies Rikken. I invite her to the stage, please. She is a researcher and project manager specializing in personal data and digital identities. And for the past 7 years, actually, Marlies has conducted studies for multiple public and private organizations in the Netherlands. So what she will present now is really an overview of the Dutch personal data landscape and its developments over the past few years. And she will basically show some future considerations and challenges that need to be tackled. And we all hope that also inspires some thinking about what is really necessary to realize a prosperous and fair personal data ecosystem within a country, but of course also across the European Union. Marlies, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, and thank you for the introduction, Sven. I'm very happy to be able to share a small part, at least, of the research that I've been involved with all of those present today. So in the next 7 minutes, I will talk to you about the personal data landscape in the Netherlands and the challenges it faces. So since this is a short talk, I have to cut some corners and I cannot be as nuanced as I would maybe want to be normally. So please, if you would like to know more or if you want to discuss about points you feel very passionate about, do feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn after this session. And of course, ask questions where you have them. Next 2 slides, please. Yes, next one. Next slide, please. Yeah, oh, there we are. Okay, so for this talk, I will assume that you have some prior knowledge on how the digital identity and the personal data ecosystem and its use cases work. Now, since Viivi already did a great job at explaining this in the talk before, you're all experts now as well, of course. If you don't feel like an expert yet, I would encourage you to read the MyData Operator white paper, which is a great resource to gain more in-depth background knowledge on this topic from the MyData viewpoint. Next slide, please. So on the surface, at least, the Dutch personal data landscape looks very vibrant. Next slide, please. There are many initiatives from aspiring personal data wallets to trust frameworks. And we see that there are many collaborations between parties in both public and private sectors. So one of the first initiatives to pop up was Mijn Overheid, or what we would call My Government, where you can see whatever personal data the government has about you or yourself in their registries. And this is still developing. This was back in 2005. Now we see in 2008, the trust framework Key followed. Key is still developing itself and also had some struggles along the way. From 2015 onward, we see many more self-sovereign identity or identity wallet type initiatives that have come into the personal data space. We see that this has come into effect along with, for example, the GDPR. There was a lot more publicity, a lot more news on the topic, so that we see that there's also more interest from startup initiatives that want to come into the space. Keep in mind as well, when you look at this picture, that the first movers are not noted here, the first movers that failed, so that there are also initiatives that aren't in this space anymore that aren't noted in this picture. If you're interested in learning more about the development over time, do check out the personal data landscape report that we made for the Dutch Ministry of Internal Affairs during my time at Innovalor. Next slide, please. So when we cut to an overview of this landscape across a couple of sectors, we see that there are multiple initiatives present in each and every one of them. Now, what I mean when I say active and present is that we see many pilots and many use cases being tested. This happens within different consortia and collaborations. And some of these data wallets are even utilized in live processes. For example, Octo is one that can actually be used for providing personal financial data with the purpose of getting a mortgage. This is in the financial sector. Next slide, please. So that makes you maybe wonder, like, okay, if this landscape has existed for so long and there's so many parties involved, why don't we Dutch citizens all have an identity wallet yet, right? Because there's so much going on. Well, there are a couple of issues that arise when trying to create the ecosystem that is envisioned by many of us here. Next slide, please. So I will highlight a couple of the important issues that I have seen for the Netherlands. These are the 4 main challenges that I want to share now, and I'm also very curious to learn what the views and experience are in other member states, because this is, of course, maybe different for other nations. Perhaps some of the issues are the same, and there might be more than I've noted here. And perhaps there's already solutions in other countries. So firstly, what we see is that the fragmented landscape that we have will lead to many different separate pilots. And that is great because we need experimentation, but this also limits the potential for interoperability across the whole ecosystem, especially since we see that standardization that is happening is being limited to those specific pilots and coalitions that there are currently. So secondly, we see that data sources, both public and private, are not easily accessible enough. So for any identity wallet a person might have, it is still quite difficult, and they need to utilize screen scraping, for example, when accessing certain personal data from public organizations' registries. This can, of course, lead to more faults and more hurdles when you want to have correct data to work with. So this needs improving. Moving on further, in the current situation, we do not have a real choice. So Viivi also emphasized this. We need real choice of personal data wallet. And at the moment, the one you can use is most often determined by the data using service, by the service provider. And they force me to use a third-party service. And this does not do well when it comes to trusting a party. So especially when these are private parties I've never heard of before. Even though they might have very good intentions, for a normal user, this is still an unknown party. So why should I trust this, right? Is it just because this bank or this municipality tells me to? So that raises some questions. Now, lastly, the business model in this ecosystem is not yet mature. We see varying business models being implemented by wallets. Some work, some don't. But mainly at the moment, there is no ecosystem-wide method of value exchange, let alone one that's interoperable. Next slide, please. So when we consider these issues, how is the personal data ecosystem in the Netherlands supposed to move forward? And this is a quite difficult question. And a couple of difficult decisions, I think, need to be made at the governing level. So at the moment, we see that many of the use cases and pilots that are being run in the Netherlands get stuck in a pilot phase. Why is this? Well, because there's inaccessibility of the data in live processes. So using mock-up data when it comes to public data is okay, but when we want to implement it into live solutions, the progress gets stuck at the legal side. Because it is uncertain how it is supposed to be handled. So legal issues arise and they aren't sure how to handle it. And this leads to the fact that we see ministries act in very different ways. So one ministry might act different than another when it comes to piloting and experimenting. So in my opinion, steps need to be taken when it comes to making personal data in the registries of public organizations available. A choice needs to be made how and under which conditions this is done for all the governmental institutions that handle those registries. So we want the uniformity there, so it's become clear, like if I'm a private party, how should I handle your data? This should be a lot easier. So with the upcoming eIDAS regulation, this might forcibly change, right? Since these sources will have to become accessible to identity wallets, the ones that are notified. But even then, that process will be very difficult for those governmental institutions. So that work really needs to start now. Secondly, we need to choose, or we need to make a decision whether the identity wallet should be a public service for all and who should provide this service. Should it be for the market to provide, or should it be a public service? And if we cannot come to a viable business model through the market, maybe it should be. Again, we see that the eIDAS regulation has an opinion here. Each member state will at least have to provide one identity wallet, whether that's market or public is still not necessarily noted there, and that the wallet should be free for the individual. So either way that choice goes, the member states need to consider that this will impact the market. And yeah, that is something to take into account. So next slide, please. Yes, to round off, I would like to thank you all for your attention so far. And please do stick around for the talk of Raf, because I know that the Belgians do have made some decisions on the topics that I mentioned here already. And yeah, I very much look forward to your discussions and questions on this topic. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Many thanks, Marlies, not only for already bridging to the next talk, but also for giving us a brief walkthrough through the last 6 years of Dutch personal data landscape, and also pointing to some failures, because actually we can also learn a lot from what didn't work, and sometimes it's not enough recognized. I think also you made a very good point on the fragmentation of experiments and that we're not there yet. So it's again a call for more interoperability. And you also nicely already pointed out the responsibility of public administrations to prepare for a future where really citizens can all be offered an equal choice to manage their own data. So really, really good. Again, going back to our audience, while typing your questions, remember that Marlies offered you can connect with her via LinkedIn to follow up specifically. But please feel free to also shoot your questions already now. I'm having a quick look at the moment. One thing just came in. So basically, Marlies, if you could say a few more words on which of the challenges that you mentioned you think are the most important to tackle? So you put a lot of things on the table, but what would be the first two we should shoot at?
Well, I guess I already kind of gave it away, right, in my very last slide. So I do think that one of the most important things is accessibility to the data, right? Because if we don't have that, we don't have anything. We can make all these wonderful technical solutions, but if those public registries are inaccessible, then how are we supposed to use them? I think it's a tragedy that I still am unable to properly access my personal medical data. That's just ridiculous, right? So that needs to be fixed. Or these solutions, you know, they might be technically wonderful, but still have no actual use case. So that for me is the one point. And then the other one is like, you need to make a decision. Like, are we going to do this publicly or privately? Because now we see a mix of both. So in the Netherlands, especially, there's also still a discussion of, are we as a government going to provide a basic identity, just as we do with a physical identity, right? We make passports. Should the government provide this digital identity as well, right? And that question I don't necessarily have the answer to right now, but I think it's an important one to consider. Because this will impact the market, right? There are a lot of identity providers out there that would think this is probably a horrible idea, because then they lose their business. So, yeah, something to consider.
Very good. Excellent. So we have food for thought for future work. That's always good. And with this, we already came all the way from Finland to the Netherlands. And now we actually do a little step more to the south. So we go to the Flemish region of Belgium and to Dr. Raf Buyle. Basically, he is information architect at Digital Flanders and an advisor in e-government strategy at the Flemish government. So he tries to implement more rational and interoperable e-government, and he's a great promoter of open data, open standards, and open processes. So what we will hear from Raf right now will be how the Flemish government supports the digital transformation of our society, and the Flemish society in particular. The intervention will particularly look into the challenges for data sharing and explain how those can be overcome or are already overcome in Flanders. So, as already announced by Marlies previously, please enlighten us and show us some solutions, Raf. The floor is yours.
Sven, thank you for the kind introduction. So let's jump to the next slide. So I would like to share how we are streamlining public and private processes, so to create hyper-personalized services by putting citizens again in control of their own data. So let's jump to the next slide. So where did we start? We started by focusing on a digital by default government, and on the next slide you can see one of the initiatives from 2015. It's the My Citizen profile. So today in Flanders, each citizen has his own citizen profile, and it's a real no wrong door policy, so you can access it through local governments, to the regional government. This means if you're at a website of a regional government, you can access your profile and you can see the interactions with your local government. Even you can request documents and services at a city where you are not a resident. So it's really a no wrong door policy. All interactions, but also all data. I can access my diplomas since 5 years on my citizen profile. Let's jump to the next slide. But the real aim from the start was not only to give access to all the data that's owned by government, but also to allow citizens to reuse their data in other contexts. If I'm moving, I would like to reuse my address. If I'm applying for a new job, I would like to reuse my diploma, but also I would like to reuse data from the private sector within the context of the government. So the aim is now not only focusing on the digital transformation of the government, but is focusing on the digital transformation of the society as a whole. So society and economics. Let's jump to the next slide. If we think about data fragmentation, we are often thinking about the government, servers in a basement, and as you all know, the classical e-government lasagna with the software stack. But as borders between public and private sector tend to blur, we have a new context of data fragmentation. If I would like to move from point A to F, within the context of the green economy and shared mobility, then I'm using a shared car, a shared bike, and maybe public transport. And then I would like that my data follows me, because now my data is often logged in applications of commercial vendors. And if I move to another application, they don't know me, I don't have my context anymore, and I really have a start-stop experience, both and indeed also physically start-stop experience within the context of shared mobility. Therefore, citizens must be in control of their data again. And in the next slide, we see how data silos look like. Often we see I'm jumping to the next slide. Okay, so often we see real silos, but these are the new silos because the borders between public and private sectors tend to blur, and these are the new information silos. Let's jump to the next slide. So, of course, we are all familiar with the European data spaces, where we want interoperability within one data space, for instance, mobility, but also across the data spaces. Because when I would like to combine mobility with proactive health, then we need links between the different data spaces. Therefore, in Florence, we have an interoperability program, Open Standards for Linked Organizations, Oslo, since 2013. And it's not focusing on creating Flemish standards, but it's really a data ops strategy to adopt the European standards. And if we jump to the next slide, then we see that we're talking about interoperability and data, but why is data not flowing yet? And probably I'm preaching for the choir because I'm at Semantic, but we have no standardized sockets for data. If I go to a government building, they don't have separate sockets for the government where you can plug in your computer or toaster, but it's standardized. We have fear of losing control of our data, and we see that trust between stakeholders to share data is lacking. And the past 4 years, we have been struggling how to enable the private companies and to enable that data can flow, so there will be more innovation. So in the next slide, you can see that Flanders is now investing in data utilities. The past decades, governments were investing in gas and electricity, and even the past millennia, think about the Odrome and the aqueducts, where governments were investing in high performance networks of water. So these are real utilities. And therefore, 1 week ago, the Flemish Parliament decided to start up a data utility company, which lowers the borders of companies and allows that data can flow. It's an implementation of the European data intermediary, which comes with legislation which allows data to flow between public and private partners as electricity, gas, and water are already flowing. Let's jump to the next slide. So we have a lot of focus domains. I've blurred some and I focused on one, more privacy than ever. Let's jump to the next slide. So when we're talking about the privacy problem, I think, of course, we have a privacy problem, but we do have an innovation problem, because a lot of companies, they are focusing on to collect as many data as possible. And this is why data cannot flow, and we have an innovation problem. And the spillover effect is that we have a privacy problem. So in Flanders, we are shifting from data which is stored at level of applications, service providers, and we are going to separate data from the applications. So the citizen will get his own data vault. So each Flemish citizen will have his own data vault. So now in France, we have all citizens have a minimum of gas, water, and electricity, regardless their income. Well, now they will have data utilities and a data vault where they can store their data, not documents, structured data, which can be reused, interoperable data. So the citizen, again, in control of their data by using a personal data store. Let's jump to the next slide. So there we are going to move from data control by companies to data controls by individuals. Because when you share your data, there will be more data, more privacy, and more innovation. And let me give you one example in my last slide. So in Belgium, we have the Flemish citizen profile, where you can access all your data. And for example, let's I get it from the ethic. It's my diploma. When you need to share your diploma with your future employer, you will share all your data on your diploma, and probably you will share it forever. And that's the analog way. But sometimes you only need proof that you have a master diploma, and you don't need to share all your data, and you don't need to share it forever. And therefore, we are focusing on the data vault. We are choosing Solid, the Solid protocol to share the data. The citizen will be in control of their data, and they can just share, like, yes, I have a master diploma with a digital stamp, like a verifiable credential, and that's it. And you can use this data for 2 weeks. So my future employer can use the data for 2 weeks, and we're not sharing all the data. So by moving from analog to digital, it's not less privacy, but it's more privacy than ever. And therefore, we're focusing on the data vaults. And crucial in our strategy is that it's about interoperable data, because the portability of data is crucial in order to get more innovation, personalized services, and more privacy than ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raf. Very, very inspiring. Also great to hear your introduction about the citizens' profile at the regional level. So really seeing how you can not only access your own data, but also enabling the reuse, and also basically hearing what we heard before from Marlies, concretizing it, how the data can follow yourself. And basically you can take it along with your different daily pathways. It was really illustrated very nicely in your presentation. So thanks again. Also pointing to some of the difficulties, but also the possibility and this concept of a data utility company. I think that's really intriguing and interesting to follow up at a certain moment. Before we will have one question to everyone, there is also a question for you, Raf. Basically, picking up to your on your final comment on actually the technology used. Why was a Flemish government at the end choosing a Solid? Can you maybe give us a short explanation, that we also have a few minutes for one final question to the entire panel?
Well, Sven, that's a very interesting and stunning question. Let me think about it. So Solid is not a technology, it's a protocol. It's invented by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who gave us the web over 30 years ago, and the web is now playing an important role in our lives and our economy. If we jump back to 30 years ago, what was the invention of the web? It was a combination of standards, because I don't have to explain why standards are important at a SEMIC conference, but it really was a set of standards which allowed any browser to connect to any server, and that we were also able to have links, so that I could create a hyperlink to your website, without having a physical handshake or a contract. And now Sir Tim Berners-Lee is having a course correction of the web by putting citizens again in control of their data. And it's the same. It's about an application, just like a browser, connecting to a server, in this case a pod server, using standards. So we've chosen the solid standard because it's not rocket science. It's using building blocks from the web that we've been using for over 30 years. It's about standardization because in Flanders we have an interoperability first strategy. And there it's important that data is portable, and in order to be portable, we need standards. And this is the reason that we've chosen for the solid protocol.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for this explanation, also underlying the need of standards and going for a protocol rather than a distinct lock-in technology. We basically have only a few minutes left, and now, as anticipated, in a short session, questions tend to pile up towards the end. But I want to pick one of them, which is actually continuing along the discussion on standards. And this is from Philippe Duchesne, and he's basically asking that achieving interoperability and reuse of personal data will also mean agreeing on semantic standards, so on ontologies and also semantics and structured interoperability. And you need those for each specific domains. So if you talk mobility, if you talk energy, if you talk any other utility that was mentioned. So the question is, who and what processes should be in charge of making this happen? There is a big one. Is it the EU? Is it some standardization consortium? Is it just emerging bottom up from the application ecosystem? What are your views? And this goes to all of you, to Viivi, Marlies, and Raf. So maybe we start with Viivi. She was silent for some time. Please, I'm really curious to hear your reaction.
Well, this is a very simple question to answer. Who should decide? I don't know. I think it needs to be as democratic a process as possible. So in that sense, I do believe in kind of looking at the grassroots and the actual builders and doers and where they converge. On the other hand, I do see the value of some top-down even regulation on a very, very high level, in the sense that we need to mandate sort of interoperability as a principle, like Raf was saying, to make sure that these semantics don't become proprietary, and we don't get locked in to a system developed by some particular party who's then going to exploit it and basically undermine interoperability. So I would say it's a collaborative effort, where like technologists as well as business people, regulators, and politicians should play a part.
Fantastic, excellent answer. Really like that one. Marlies, do you want to add on this one?
Yes, I would say, to build on what Viivi is already saying, I think that in the separate nations that we have, there probably are already good initiatives within specific sectors, right? Because there are already so many working groups that are working on. I'm sorry, there are some children walking by in my by my house here. Sorry if you hear them. Sorry, to continue. So I think there's already really good work being done, and it would be wasteful to not pick up on the nations, for example, that are very good in the educational sector, that have good work there, or in the medical sector, there might be good consortiums in a member state that I don't know about right now, right? So we should definitely, it should be a collaborative effort. So I very much would emphasize that part of Viivi's answer as well.
Brilliant. Back to Raf.
Well, if we want to be in control of our own data, portability and interoperability, of course, is crucial. And I truly believe that the European Commission should focus on managing an European knowledge graph. It's organizing a process how we are going to work together on the level of member states, regions, municipalities, companies, citizens on semantics, and a method to publish it. It's not about inventing European standards, but also embracing international standards, but connecting them so we can have a connection between the different data spaces, and that we have a community where I could, in my sector, my region, my city, inherit from the European standards, extend them to fit my context, and also republish my contributions, a bit like Love, Linked Open Vocabularies is doing, but more with a community context. And I think if or when we are going to deploy the strategy on a European level on data spaces, Europe must take this position and must enable public-private partners, citizens to collaborate on semantics. The work that JoinUp and CIMIC and Interoperable Europe is doing is already stunning and helped us a lot in Flanders, but I think we must take it to the next level in order to facilitate this Interoperable Europe.
Wow, very good. So here we have also the bridge of ISA Square to Interoperable Europe. Fantastic, and tasks for all of us. So it's not only the Commission, it's not only Helsinki, not only the Netherlands, not only Flanders. We all have to come together. That's a great message. Love it. I got more questions here, also for specific speakers. However, we are at the end of the session, but I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. It really was a pleasure listening to the three of you, but also discussing a little bit in the time we had available. So thanks a lot again for the three speakers, but of course also the entire audience asking questions. I have to figure out if we can reply also afterwards using the Slido possibilities. So basically with this, I would like to end for today. We learned a lot. We heard a lot could be achieved in the past, but we have challenges and also ideas for the future. So I hope to see you before CEMIC 2020 for sure. And before going back to the conference session, we now have a 2-hour lunch. So please enjoy your lunch, take care, stay safe, and rejoin CEMIC this year at 2 o'clock. Many thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sven. Thank you all. Bye-bye.